wouldn't you know it, I've lost my mouse pointer. Hey folks, how you doing? Nick Jennison. It is the Monday Guitar Show, and I can't turn the backing track down because the mouse pointer, even though the mouse is in my hand, has run away from me. We're having all sorts of tech issues today. Welcome on board. We're doing the thing that we do on Mondays. It is the first one for 2026. Really happy to be here. We're hanging out. We're talking about the guitar. It's a catchphrase. I like the catchphrase, right? Listen, thank you so much for joining us, for spending the first Monday of this new year with us. Our objective is to make you a slightly better guitar player today when you leave us than you were when you arrived, and most specifically we're trying today to make you a more informed guitar player when you leave us than you were when you arrived. So today is going to be less about the skill in your hands and more about the knowledge in your head. Specifically, the knowledge about all of these beautiful amplifiers that I am fortunate enough to be surrounded by. We're not going to deal exclusively with my amps, well we are, but we're going to deal with not just amps because I like them, but we're going to deal with amps in terms of what it is that you need to know about them. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on sounds and performance from these amplifiers, the sort of things you can expect in terms of tone, in terms of the way they might accept pedals, in terms of how they interact with your playing, in terms of speakers that you might select, etc, etc, etc. And to mark this out, today I'm going to ask you a different question to what I normally ask you. Normally I ask you guys what guitar you're playing. We still want to know what guitar you're playing. Today I am of course playing my McCarthy 594. It's a gorgeous instrument. I love this guitar to death. It is really, really something. But rather today, I'd like to know not just which guitar you're playing, but what rig you're playing through, right? Let me know what instrument and what rig you're playing, what you plugged into today. And if you plugged into a modeler, we want to know what sound you're playing through. What have you chosen to plug into today? Today I am, of course, in the intro playing through my favorite lead sound, which is the now ubiquitous Victory Super Kraken. That will serve for some of our examples today, but it's not going to serve as all of them. So we're going to turn to the comments. We're going to see how you guys are doing on this fine, freezing cold Monday evening. But before we do, I want to take a second and share with you today's featured course, because we have featured courses here it's every week we do them, but I don't always shout them out, but I want to shout this one out today. This is Guitar Tones made simple by none other the Digital John Connon, great lad, fabulous player, really a good dude, a good egg is War John, and he knows a thing or two about tones. And specifically, this is a real easy course when it comes to getting the kind of tones that you want out of your own equipment. If you're a Neural DSP user, for example, this will be invaluable to you, but it's not limited to Neural DSP users. However, on the topic of Neural DSP, if any of you out there are quad cortex type individuals, I have recently done a load of cortex captures for all of the amps in this room, or most of the amps in this room at least. So done a whole bunch of them. If you are a Neural DSP guy, I'm planning on doing some Tone X. I don't have a Kemper, but I'm planning on doing some Tone X and some Neural Amp Modeler freeware captures as well. But for the time being, if you look for me, Nick Jennison on Cortex Cloud, I think I'm the only one up there. You'll recognize the picture because I'm kind of doing this, like flexing at the camera. I got one pose and that's it. You'll find a load of freely available captures of all of the amps in this room. If you want to grab them, you want to play through them, you can go and check that out. It's for free. You can have them. I'm just doing them out of my own curiosity. So we're going to turn to the stream, see how everyone's getting on before we get stuck in with the meat of today's stream, which is all about them amps. By the way, on this topic, and I'll keep reminding you about this, but if there are any guitars in this room that you want to hear over the course of our little hour together, if you want to hear me play any of these guitars through any of the specific amps, let's say you want to hear the Silver Sky, or maybe you want to hear the Telecaster, or you want to hear the Baritone, or whatever, just let me know, and we'll make it happen. So, first through the door, Larry Warren says, hi guitar people. He's going to miss the live show and catch up on the rebound. Spoiler warning, Larry Warren did not indeed miss the stream, and Larry is here, so I'm going to spoil that for you. Marcin is here, great to see you. Great to start into the year with a proper lesson. Thanks, man, I appreciate you being here. Marcin is one of our longest standing friends when it comes to this beautiful little community that we've built here, right? And it's always great to have you. PJ's here too, lovely to see you. Great to see you guys on board. Thanks for joining. Helmet Strap is here. He's been playing through a Diamond Spitfire for 2 years. All the gain from the amp, delay pedal, and that's it. Technology's beyond me. I have no idea what IRs are or how to use them, for example. I'm going to start this because we're going to throw that up there. Now, for me personally, this gain from amps thing, I am very much an amp gain kind of guy. I'm not a pedal gain guy, and I've never really been a pedals guy in terms of like getting the tone from the pedal, unless it's fuzz. I make an exception for fuzz because I love a fuzz, but I'm not a boost pedals kind of guy. I certainly don't do the amp in a box type pedal. I don't really do the overdrive stacking thing. I'd much rather have an amp that gives me the gain, and I'm a big fan of channel switching amps for that reason. So this is not to like diminish folks who like to do that stuff. If that's the way you like to run your sound, rock on. But it's not for me. So it's going to be amps today, but we'll talk about IRs, I'm sure. Kate Strange is in the house. Great to see you, Kate. Helmet Strap is here. Says, I would have no idea how to use amp into a PC, what 4-cable method is, and I'm sure there are better options than old Diamond today. Now listen, right, if the old Diamond amp is what you like, if it's the sound that you like, and it's the sound that sort of sets your guitar playing spirit and fire, rock on, right? Who are any of us to tell you otherwise, right? Who are any of us to tell David Gilmour that he shouldn't have plugged into those high watts and he should use a Marshall like everybody else? That's all I'm saying. Who are we to tell Dimebag Darrell that he shouldn't have been using that solid state Randall and should have just used a Mesa Boogie like everyone else? You see what I'm saying? If you like it, that's all we need to know. Kim, the big boss, is in the house. Kim, it's great to see you. I'm going to go and hang out with Kim this time next week. We'll be down in our London studio shooting some content. Hopefully we'll get another one of those kebabs, because that was absolutely incredible, those special anabolic kebabs that we had. I'll tell you more about that later. I just like a bit of food, as you guys can probably tell. He's playing his custom PRS Custom 22 tonight. The question, Kim, is which PRS Custom 22? Because Kim's got about 17 in the things. Wait, so have I. Okay, I can't criticize. I can't, but Kim's off very nice. Anyway, Cranker Tom is in the house. Says, Happy New Year, everyone. Great to see you. There are so many options out there, but a tube amp at 4x12 plus pedals is the heaviest one. It is the heaviest one in terms of tone, but it's also the heaviest one in terms of weight. And in terms of your rear suspension in your car, like the health of your rear springs, whew, modelers are a bit kinder to those. That's all I'm going to say. Now, I have no problem with my back. I lift heavy things on the regular. But in terms of car maintenance, I've got to tell you, loading a 4x12 in and out, it's not kind on vehicles. That's all I'm going to say. Response Audio's here. It's great to see you. Mike Seedorf's tuning in. Lovely to see who's playing his Charvel 1989 Charvel Fusion. Very cool. Very cool. Now, these Charvels, these are a special guitar. These are like this 2-humbucker Super Strat, but it has the Gibson scale length, which is very unusual. Sean Lane played something like that. I don't know if it was exactly that model, but it's a really cool guitar. Very interesting sound too. Axe-wise from our friend Cranker Tom, it's a Harley Benton 7-string with a fanned fretboard. Wow, okay, right, that's a little beyond what I can get on with. I don't dislike them. I think they're cool, but I can't quite make that work for myself. Steve Louth is in the house. He's playing a JP15 as per through his QC. Steve, go and find me on Cortex Cloud. Go and get my captures. They're free. You can have them. They're very cool. Cost you nothing. I think you'll like them. Larry Warren did in fact join us. That's good. We like to hear that. Mr. Megafish is here. Catmandu 1962 is here. He's playing his Les Paul traditional. Foghornish is in the house. Chris Brown with a callback to the Josh Smith episode that we did. I think that was 2 years ago, which is wild. But what a great episode that was. Might have even been longer. But that was so much fun, man. Like hanging out with those guys. The Jared episode we did as well. Killer. We should really do some more of those because I think that was super, super valuable. I agree. And I'd love to see those transcriptions. Our friend Dreams, my friend Paul is tuning in. Playing his Vintera, I'll put my teeth back in, Vintera Modified 50 Strat, love a bit of that. Our friend Vil S, 8619 says, Happy New Year to you too. My friend Tony's tuning in, playing his Ibanez. Jonathan with a lovely comment, thank you very much, man, I appreciate that. We got an Ibanez JS, we got lots of cool rigs too, let's just quickly get through those. Timothy Appling's here, Dylan Jessups is here, the Patricio De La Rosa with the best name in the stream so far is tuning in. Man, that's kind of you, thank you so much, I appreciate that. We got a Cort acoustic guitar, we got a 5150 on the QC, good choice. I know exactly what my buddy John is playing through. He's playing through his Mesa Boogie Mark IV, which is the amp of kings. Right, that is the amp of champs, the champ of amps, all about that. Our friend Vyacheslav is tuning in. 2025, guitar amplifiers are already, I'm not sure what that means, an atavism? Not sure about that. It's a word I don't know. But IRM speaker simulators allow you to find your sound, try different amplifiers, plug into mixing consoles. You know, you're right, man. Like, I'm an amp guy. I love amps. I love the way they sound. I still think even with the new V2 captures on the Quad Cortex, that the amp is just very slightly better. But we're talking like fractions of a percent maybe, if I had to put a number on it. It is enough for me to keep amps around, and I love an amp workflow in a studio. I don't take my amps out. I take a Cortex out. I don't gig my amps because they're a pain. Like it's a pain playing these amps, pain taking them places, because you got to set them up. They got to be loud. I've got to find a way to get them into my in-ears in a way that sounds good. It's a pain. I need loads of sounds. Can't deal with it, right? Can't deal with it. Jada Barta is in the house. Lovely to see you. We've got a Boss GX100, very underrated pedal with a Marshall patch. We've got a DSL 40. We've got another Mesa Mark IV. There you go. 2 Mesa Mark IVs in one chat. We used to have 2 in one band, but I sold mine to buy cameras, which I still kind of regret, but John's is a nicer one anyway. Through a 2x12 cab, vintage 30s, classic choice, love a bit of that. We've got an old Impact 60 cab with 2 notes captor, very cool. Yeah, I love a bit of that, very cool. We've got an Embrini software MP1 model, some very interesting choices here, very cool choices. I'm going to quickly get through all the rest and then we'll get about it, because I want to talk about amps. We've got a Katana X, we've got a Boss Katana, another nice one. We've got a Blackstar Mark III HT60, lots of nice rigs here, guy, I love a bit of that. What else have we got? We've got a Headrush pedal board, my friend Alan plays those. Super cool. Happy New Year to you too, Sam. Thanks for coming and joining us. We've got an Orange Crush, all this sort of stuff. I think we've got some real good ones. Oh yeah, playing one of the PRSs into a VX Mark II. Good choice. Or a Synergy system, love a bit of that. And we got a Princeton Reverb. Superb, right? So you guys have got some really nice choices. Okay. Let's begin the show then. Let's talk about amps. First of all, a quick word on how you're hearing all of this stuff. So I'm playing everything today through, I don't know if you guys can see this. I'll see if you can see it on the B cam. So down here, I have a Waza tube amp expander, which I'm running not the stock impulse responses on. I've loaded my own impulse responses into here. And I'm running through an N Audio 8x7 amp switcher. So I can switch seamlessly between all the different amps that are in this room, which will allow us to do some instant demos, and we can go straight between all of the amps that we want to hear. But before we do, let me give you a very quick whistle-stop tour of some high gain tones. And what I want to know from you guys is the difference you notice as I move between these different amps. Let me just whistle through them. I'll show you what's going on here. There's the tone from our intro. Some more. I'll stay on the high strings because I'm out of tune. I'll fix that in a second. Come on, string. Let me just fix that tuning because it is cold in here, so the guitars are warming up and the tuning is getting a little bit suspect as we go. I'll quickly fix that, and then I'll quickly whistle stop through those amps again. Take a listen, here we go. Another. 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 Did you notice a big difference there? It's an important question. Or were the differences quite small? Good question. Were the differences big? Were the differences small? You let me know. For me, I think the differences were quite small there in the grand scheme of things. I don't think those differences were huge. I think they were actually very subtle differences. Did you guys see that? No, no. Same settings. Guys, I have deceived you because those weren't amps we were switching between. Those were speakers. So that was me switching between the various impulse responses that I have loaded, and they're all different speakers each time. The reason I did this is to dispel this notion, such as it is, that the impulse response or the speaker is the only thing that matters when it comes to your tone, and that changing the speaker is the most important thing when it comes to transforming your guitar's tone. It's a huge part of it, but it's not everything. We can make big changes with our amplifiers with the same speaker, right? With the same speaker. It was the same amp. It was a Victory Super Kraken. I just changed the speakers. And the reason I did this in this somewhat deceptive manner is just to head off any comments like that, where it's going to be like, oh, just change the speakers. That's the thing that makes the most difference. It makes a difference, but everything in your signal chain makes a difference, including you, the player. You make a difference to the signal chain. So, with that slightly deceptive demonstration aside, let's start by exploring some amplifier food groups. And we're going to begin by exploring some of the big ones. Specifically, we're going to take a look at the 4 main families of amplifier, in my opinion, which are a Fender style amp, a Vox style amp. Fender's big, there's lots of Fenders. Vox, a bit more specific. We're going to take a look at some Marshall style amps, and we'll take a look at some high gain style amps and explore the big differences between them. So let's start by taking a quick look. I'm just going to reset this over here. We're going to come back to that. I'm going to take a quick look at some Fender style amplifiers. And for this, we must find ourselves an appropriate speaker. So we're going to choose this speaker type for this one. This is not the most Fendery speaker in the world, but it's a Celestion GT65, which is a beautiful sounding speaker, using a lot of 2-rocks, so it has that sort of vibe to it. We're going to steer clear of the D-style amp today, because I don't have one on hand, but you can think about it as like everything a Fender does, only more. Here are a couple of examples of some potential candidates for that, and I quote, Fender clean. Here is one. Let's take a listen. Very pretty, I'm sure you'll agree. Here is another potential candidate for that Fender clean. Oh, let me make sure that that's actually set to where it's supposed to be. I don't believe it is. Ah, wrong amp. There we go. Here we go. Let's go to this one. Another potential candidate. Very different. Let's take a look at this one, which is perhaps the most authentic of the bunch. Now, the irony of this is that in this specific setup that we're playing, the Fender Clean, the most authentic Fender Clean, is actually not a Fender amp. It is a Marshall amplifier that I've chosen, but it embodies the Fender Clean archetype, which is, there are lots of Fender amps, let me just say this up front, and tweed amps, brown face amps, they all sound different. We're talking about that specific, bubbly, bright, slightly hairy Fender Clean, and this comes, in this instance, from a JTM 45 combo that I have kicking around right down out of shot over here. You guys see it down there? That is a JTM 45 Studio combo. Now this is a Marshall amplifier. It is not a Fender amp, but the reason we've chosen this one is because JTM 45s, the first Marshalls ever made, were basically Fender Bassman amps. They were the same. They were just made with a different, some different components, but the components weren't so different as to fundamentally change the character of the amp. But there is one defining characteristic of these types of amplifiers that I think is super important, and it's that the tone stack, as in the treble, middle, and bass, comes before any of the distortion. So any additional gain stages that might be in the amplifier, the tone stack comes first. You'll see this in Mesa Boogie Mark amplifiers, for example, which are unique among high gain amps for being the basically modded Fenders rather than being modded Marshalls. Everything else is on that modded Marshall platform that became the Soldano SLO, and everything's kind of been built from there, which then diverged into a Dual Rectifier and a 5150. Most modern high gain amps are some blend of those. But I digress. So this sort of tone, this is our go-to if we are expecting some beautiful, big, bright, bubbly cleans with a nice, big, profoundly rich low end and a little bit of pleasant compression on the top end. Let me talk through the amps that I played there. So this first amp, this is our JTM 45. You can hear that gorgeous Fenderiness on the go there. none of the bright aggressiveness and the teeth that you'd expect from a Marshall amp. That is our Fender archetype for this. However, the first amp we played, which is actually set a little louder, I'll turn it down just a tiny bit, is this. And that amp in this instance is a PRS Archon that I have sat down here that sports a very Fender style clean channel. You will notice that the Archon has more of a refinement to it. This is something that me and a couple of my pals have started referring to as posh Fender. So it's posh Fender in the sense that it's a bit more refined, the low end is a bit more robust, it sounds a bit more like a Fender amp that's been recorded and has been processed. Maybe there's some additional compression, maybe it sits a little bit cleaner in terms of its position on the tone spectrum. You will notice that with most really great Fender style clean tones, like this JTM 45, there's actually a little bit of hair on the top end. There's a little bit of crispiness. Let's say that is not a completely clean sound. And a completely clean sound in this instance is probably not desirable. Because it would sound a little bit anemic. This slightly crispy, distorted clean sound, you can actually play a bit more dynamically with, a bit more dynamically, easy for me to say. So even though it's a little quiet, we can play. And if we dig in, it doesn't kick us in the teeth, and if we lay back, it doesn't completely vanish. This comes from having a little bit of clipping in our signal chain. Now we can push this further and we can get into what I consider to be some of the more, let's say more teethy Fender archetypes, and I've got a really great sound that I think embodies that too, but we'll get to that in a second, because we also need to talk about speaker pairings with this, because as we discussed previously, every amplifier pairs with a particular sound with a speaker in a particular fashion. And for this, I've chosen a G1265. The reason for this is that's quite a nasal sounding speaker. It's quite a confined sounding driver. And you find in these great old Fender amps, the driver itself is actually not that bright sounding. If we took a look at something like quite an open and sizzly sounding Greenback H on our Fender sound, which is this, it sparkles really hard, but it doesn't really have that same mid-range presence as the more nasally speaker. And oftentimes in these Fender combos, the presence actually comes from the nasal quality and the honk in the speaker. If we put a Vintage 30 in there, for example, which is a common mod in a, let's say, Hot Rod Deluxe, you can hear how sparkly this becomes. Cool sound. You want to play some funk stuff? It really kind of sits and skanks really nicely, but it doesn't have that same roundness and fullness as we would get from using this slightly more nasal speaker. So you tend to find, even though the amp itself is thought of as a sparkly sound, the speaker itself is actually maybe less sparkly. And you'll notice this becomes true in the inverse as we start to move our way through to higher gains. Now, this to me is the epitome of the Fender clean tone. A lot of sparkle, a lot of kind of brightness on the high end, but it's not completely wide open. It's not like playing a DI signal, which is kind of unpleasant. So an example of that would be something like if you've ever played a Silverface Fender. So one of the big differences between the old blackface and the old Silverface designs, so called because of the color of the faceplate. The Silverfaces were an attempt by engineers to solve the air quotes problems with the blackface amps, which was they were cleaner, they were brighter, they had more headroom, they didn't break up as easily, and generally it's consensus that they don't sound as great because it's a cool sound, it's its own sound, but because of these things where it doesn't like break up in the same way, it's not it. Not it, man. So I don't have an amp on hand that will do that, but if you have a very bright, very like super anemic, high-end, clean, yeah, maybe. So let's talk about how you can dial that in. So what I have going on down here is my PRS Archon, which is this clean sound. This will be our substitute modern Fender sound, which is a little louder, a bit more of an appropriate volume. Now, for this, I want to talk a little bit when it comes to clean tones about the relationship between the master volume of an amplifier, if it has one, which we can also substitute for the amp's power, like how loud the amp is. We can keep those kind of in our head as two things that are separate but the same thing. And the input volume, because these two play off against each other in very interesting ways. If you would like the most openness and the least compression and distortion from your amplifier, what it behooves you to do is to take the master volume, which I'm about to do now, and dime it. So get the master volume all the way up, and then creep in the input volume until your level is appropriate, which will give you this. Which is a very dynamic, very hi-fi clean sound. You can hear there's no top end kind of break up on that at all. Even when I hit the thing, that is the amp's master volume as loud as it will go, and the input volume just cracked open. This is one of the reasons why people often struggle with Fender Twins, for example, because Twins are brutally powerful and brutally heavy, but they're exceptionally powerful sounding amplifiers. And what happens with those is unless you start to get them in the zone where they start to compress, I had a Twin for a while and I loved it, but it was a hard amp to live with. So unless you get it in that zone where it starts to compress, by turning the amp up, because it doesn't have a master volume, turning the amp up, it feels very stiff and there's no give. So if you're playing here, for example, and you happen to slip and hit one note a little harder than the others, that clean kicks you in the teeth. If I switch to the JTM 45 with a bit of extra hair on top, for example, I can lay in really heavy and it still has that sparkle and that sort of very pleasant, open, chimey quality. But it doesn't have that same, like, super dynamic, over the top, like, bloody hell, that's hard to handle kind of thing. So we can do the opposite. If you want that super high headroom clean, and if, like Steve Louth points out, you use a compressor, which is a good choice. So I've got my Sir Koji comp down here, which I'm now running into that super high headroom amp. And now there is just loads of nice compression, which keeps everything contained. Unless you're going to do that, if you don't want that hi-fi clean to really take your teeth out, what you can do instead is you can run the master volume down, if you have one, or you can run a slightly lower power amplifier if you have one, and you can start to crank the input volume to get the same perceived level. Now here, I've kind of overdone it a little bit, but now we get this. We've got a little bit of hair on the tone, a little bit of compression, a little bit of sizzle. You would still hear that and go, that's a clean tone, you know. I'm not about to play Black and Black on that. It's not really it. It works, but it's not really it. Now that is a much more forgiving tone in terms of the dynamics because of the compression that's in there. But what you maybe lose is a little bit of the bubbliness and a bit of the like super chiminess that you get from a more wide open amplifier. This is really a case of dialing in the output volume of the amp versus the input volume of the amp to get the appropriate compression that you're looking for. And on old school amplifiers, unless you have an attenuator, you don't have control of the output volume. But if you have a modeler, you can like turn the output of your amp block down and turn the input up appropriately to start to get a bit of compression if that's something you want. One more quick demonstration on this. This is input volume up and master volume down. Let's switch them around. Here is master volume full, input volume down. Much more dynamic, much more responsive in terms of the volume you get from your pick attack, and on it goes. Now let's move from this onto something a little bit different, which is, to my mind, what I'm going to kind of consider the tweed clean archetype. And this comes in a very unusual place, because the best tweed clean that I have in this room, no word of a lie, is in the Super Kraken. What are the chances, right? So this is a weird quirk of the Super Kraken versus the Mark II Kraken. Mark II Kraken has a really beautiful open clean sound. The Super Kraken really doesn't. Like, the clean sound is not something you would use for a clean per se, but what it does give you is it gives you this kind of sound, which is a little bit more teethy. If we get a bit of spring reverb on there, we can get this. Now that is a very cool sound that would also read as clean and would also belong in the Fender family, but it's not the same as our Archon type clean or a big bubbly Fender Blackface or a big Fender Twin type clean. It's a different thing entirely. So if you find yourself reaching for that really like wide open, chimey, bubbly clean, and your first port of call is to go to like a Tweed Deluxe, that might not be the thing. Because these amps tend to sound more constrained. They tend to sound a little more nasal. They tend to have a bit more clipping at the same volume. They don't have to clip, but they have a bit more of a pronounced mid-range honk and forwardness to them, which is different, again, to those kind of wide open clean tones. So this, why is this guitar not wanting to play in tune? Let me just figure this out, right? Because this is driving me nuts. I think it's just a combination of new strings and cold weather. It must be, but it's really bugging me. I'll fix it as we go. So okay, this thing. Versus this. Very different sounds, very different applications. So should you find yourself searching for a Fender sound, do be aware that both of those are examples of what I would consider a Fender type sound. If we go a little further with this and we start pushing the input on that Super Kraken clean, things can get very hairy indeed, and we get this sort of deal. Very honky, very forward, lots of clipping, lots of compression, lots of distortion there. You see where I'm going up with this? Now, same deal, but this is our mega Fendery clean. We're going to use the same boost, which in this instance is going to be an Ibanez TS9. I'll throw this in front. It's the ubiquitous boost pedal. There is the unboosted Kraken. Here's the boost pedal. Same setup. Here is the Archon, which is our bright bubbly clean boost pedal. Oh, that's not the same thing, right? The pedal sounds radically different into this amp than it does into this amp. Funny how that works, isn't it? Now, in terms of speakers, once again, with this tweed type sound, which is the second of our Fender archetypes, we are looking for quite a closed off nasal sounding speaker. Let me show you the difference between this, which is our G1265, and this, which is our Vintage 30. That's not the sound, right? That sounds okay, but this, that's the sound. So these closed off sounding small cabinets, they go hand in hand with, in my opinion at least, with the Fender thing, right? Hugely, hugely, hugely different. Now, let's move on to the Vox thing, because this comes in two super distinct flavors, in my opinion. Because when you say Vox, it means so many things to so many people. So let's define the differences here. So Vox, in case you guys aren't familiar, were the relative latecomers to the amp game when it comes to the classic amps of the 1950s and 60s. Fender were first, Marshall came second, Vox were late to the party in the mid-60s, I think 64, 65. And it's a British amplifier with a wildly different design to the other amplifiers on the of the same era. So it used a completely different style of bias. It has a completely different tone layout with a master tone control, sometimes treble and bass controls, sometimes some combination of the two, or the three rather. It's an interesting family of amps and it has a certain sound, and we are representing this today with the Victory Copper, and specifically with another addition to the Victory Copper, which is the Victory Copper V4 preamp that I'll talk about in a second. This is our Vox sound. Let me quickly hot switch between these. So here is the Copper. Here is our Fender type sound. Here is our Fender Tweed type sound. Here's the Vox. You can hear there's a very distinct difference in terms of where it sits, both in terms of distortion, in terms of compression, and where it sits in terms of the frequency response. And Vox amps are very interesting because they chime and they sparkle in a similar way to a Fender amplifier, but they don't have the same bubbliness. They're leaner in the low end. They have this attack in the upper mid-range that some people have called the blizzard of nails. Very interesting description of the tone. It's a really cool sound, but it has a real distinct kind of character to it that is interesting when it comes to stacking pedals on top. That's all I'm going to say with this. So if you're like a pedal stacking kind of character, Vox amps can be really cool. They can be your worst nightmare, depending upon which pedals you're choosing. The reason for this is these amps tend to be wide open in their power amp. They tend to use no negative feedback. We won't get into the details of this, but that's a huge thing, which basically makes these amps super fast, super aggressive. They've got a very like abrasive quality, but in a cool way. And depending on what you stack on them, you can get some really interesting sounds. So for example, it is the U2 delay. So if we throw this on, we get that mix up really high. We can get this. That is the sound of Vox amplifiers, right? If we play it with a Fender, or the Fender Type Clean, it sounds nice, but it's not it. It's not that same thing. When we get that Vox chime in there, that's a much different sound and much closer to the thing that I think we're looking for that tone. There's a reason for that. It's because that's what they used, but it's also a very cool country tone, for example. So in terms of country sounds, when I hear a Vox amplifier in terms of country, I always think of Brad Paisley, because Brad is a Vox guy. So if we take a compressor and a tube screamer, that Vox amp really delivers the goods for that stuff. And you normally wouldn't necessarily associate Vox amplifiers with country, but it is the Brad Paisley sound, which I think is super friggin' cool. So that's a friend Nick Jennison saying, was that a TC 2290 in a Vox? It was close. It was the other way around. It should have been into the Vox, but it was our Vox analog, which is the Victory Copper, into the Strymon timeline that is serving as a substitute to that 2290. We won't get into the delay a little bit. Yeah, if you do play this with a telly, it really helps, Marley. You're absolutely correct. It's that's what it sounds like. But if we take the same tone, if we take the tube screamer compressor, we play it into a Fender amp. Turn the volume up a little bit. Let's get it a little bit hotter. It's fun, it works, but if we go to the Vox, there we have it. Now, another thing that is a huge part of the Vox tone, and this is before we get into the distorted Vox tone, is the speaker choice, once again. Now, this is an interesting comparison, or an interesting thing about Vox amps, because you find with Fender amplifiers, you have these boxy, nasal sounding speakers combined with these beautiful, open, chimey sounding amps. But in Vox, it's bright amp, bright speaker, because they historically use Alnico Blue speakers. It's Alnico speakers of every stripe. I only have access to an Alnico Cream impulse response here, but it'll give you the same idea. Now, Alnico Blues are really interesting speakers because they have the same chimey quality that we get from our Vox, but it kind of doubles it up. Listen to the grit on the high end as I move from our mid-rangey Fender style speaker, which is this, to our Alnico style speaker. Here I have that kind of, oh sorry, there's the wrong one. Here's the Alnico speaker. Here's the Fender speaker. Very bubbly. Here's the Alnico speaker. It's bright on bright compared to this, which is holding back that brightness just a little bit. Now, another speaker that was common in Vox amplifiers is a greenback, which radically changes the sound. It's bigger, it's more open, but it doesn't have the chime we get from our Alnico. Hear that extra sizzle in the high end. It's a beautiful thing. Now, another example of the Vox tone that we haven't talked about is, you have to excuse me, I'm going to cough, is the rock Vox sound, which is something that is very common. We think of Vox as, it's the Beatles tone, it's the Brad Paisley thing, if that makes sense, but it's also this British rock kind of sound, if that makes sense. And this tends to come not from just the Vox amp on its lonesome, but it's the Vox amp with some stuff. Specifically what you tend to find, if we think about guys like Rory Gallagher, early Judas Priest, the big one is of course Brian May, and we think about these guys that have this fabulous rock sound from Vox amplifiers, you tend to find the missing component is the treble booster. And the inclusion of a treble booster, man, that makes a big difference. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to switch to our Victory V4 copper amplifier, preamplifier rather, which is, this is an interesting character, because what it does is it recreates the preamp from the copper, but it also has a mode that has a treble booster built in, which is the top boost mode, which I'm going to switch between now. I have to do this manually, so you'll have to excuse me. But here is our Vox tone once again, with Alnico speaker. I could crank the gain on that as far as it would go, and it would not give me the tone from Hammer to Fall. But if I hoy on this different version of the preamp that has the treble booster in it, fabulous. What a great sound. And if we then combine that once again with some of the legendary like post effects that we found in Queen's oeuvre, such as maybe an analog chorus, if I can find one. Here's a good one. It's how cool, right? How cool. That has such a specific kind of sound to it. That beautiful splat and this whack that we get from running the treble booster into our AC30. Victor have built this into a box for us, which is pretty cool. We can run that a bit hotter and get even more, but there is a character to that. There is a little character to that, and man, it is completely undeniable. It's also Rory Gallagher, so it's that. Especially like early Rory, that's really where that's at. But it's also early Judas Priest, which is a mad thing to think about, really, because you think Judas Priest, you think big screaming Marshalls, but Glenn Tipton's favourite guitar player, Rory Gallagher. Anyway, on with the show. So let's talk about Marshalls for a second, because Marshalls just have that Marshall sound, right? What does that mean? Because we talked previously about the idea of this being a Marshall sound because it's coming from a Marshall. This is the venerable JTM45. And our JTM45 is providing us with this pseudo Fender clean type tone, because what we're dealing with here with these early JTM amplifiers rather than the JMP style amplifiers is we have essentially a Fender Bassman with a Marshall badge on the front. So if you have a JTM45, you might not get the Marshall sounds you're expecting in terms of these big plexi style sounds or these big JCM 800 type sounds. I'm going to differentiate between those two as well, because those really are the big food groups when it comes to Marshall. So we can recognize the JTM 45, but for me that is a subset of Fender type amplifier because it basically is a Fender. However, when we get to something like this, for example, this is in the domain of plexi. And the plexi is such a big family of amplifiers. It is everything from some of the early like JTM 100 heads, like JTM heads you could think of. The early ones kind of fell into that plexi tonal ballpark, all the way through to the ubiquitous 1959 Super Lead. That's a model, not a year. The 1987, which was the 50-watt version of the same, and every little derivative that's come of them. For this, what I'm using to show you some weird and wonderful things about plexis, I guess, is I'm actually using a Victory Sheriff 44. And if any of you saw a recent video I did on Plexi Quest, let's say, you'll notice that this has a very specific sound to it. But I've brought this up to show you that this is an example of maybe an older, squeakier, splattier type of plexi. Let me get the gain turned up just a fair whack on there. We'll dime it out and we'll go. Now, you might be listening to that and going, that doesn't have the squeak and attack and poke that you would expect from a super lead, to which I would encourage you to go and listen to some Paul Kossoff and go and listen to some Angus Young, because in the voices of these players, you will find this particular sound, this particular folded upon itself. Almost collapsing kind of tone from this cranked Marshall. Now, if we're talking about Angus, we're talking about like early era Angus. So we've also got kind of a Jimmy Page vibe from Chris Brown. Absolutely a very good observation. But you'll notice that this actually has quite a lot in common with this cranked Vox sound. Which was our treble booster into the Vox. The Vox is much brighter in this instance, but if we go back to our air quotes plexi, that's a very cool sound. Now, this does not have the immediacy of some plexi tones, and certainly not an immediacy that I really enjoy in a plexi tone, but it's a cool sound. However, if we turn our attention to this is a great example of what I'm talking about when it comes to immediacy. Any guesses on what plexi that was? Because that was a JCM 800. That's a JCM 800. Now, when we hear the words JCM 800, we usually think, oh, big metal sounds like JCM 800, Kerry King, Slayer. JCM 800s you can think of as being a very bright take on the Marshall plexi thing. Great with humbuckers, great with dark speakers. If you're a Strat player, tread with care. You don't find many folks who play Strats into JCM 800s. I think maybe the only example I can think of a player who does it regularly is Joe Perry, and I happen to love Joe Perry's tone, but it's a very bright and very present kind of sound when Joe plays his Strats into the old 800. But that has this sort of thing going on, which still retains, even though it's a bit more gainy, has a bit more sauce, but it still has that chime, this certain kind of like splatty foldedness that we get on the Vox, which was here, same speakers. The JCM 800. Notice they don't sound a million miles apart, and the air quotes plexi. They all have this wow kind of quality going on to them. Now, when people talk about JCM 800, often what they actually mean is something closer to a modded Marshall sound, which is where that chime, which is this shing, shing, shing sound in there, that squeak on the string, it takes some of that away in favour of retaining the mid-range fullness that we get from the Marshall amplifier, but it's smoother, it's more gainy, it's maybe a little brighter, but it doesn't chime as hard, and maybe we get something like this. Let's go again. So many of those great 80s tones that we ascribe as a Marshall tone they're actually a modded Marshall tone, and you can usually tell the difference because the actual Marshall tone, when it's all gainy, is quite unruly. It folds in itself in the way that that Vox treble booster tone does, and it has a chime to it that these modded amps usually lack when they have the mods engaged, if they were switchable, for example. Another example would be if we took something like this. This is an even more aggressively modded Marshall sound. We got some love for John Sykes from our friend Mike Seedorf. You know it, John Sykes. Classic John Sykes was actually a Mesa Boogie, which is kind of wild when you think about it. You absolutely can do it on this. You can do that, especially if you put a pedal in front. Now you can hear that is very different, not just in terms of the amount of gain that's on tap, but it's very different to the delivery of our JCM 800, even with the same pedal. This has much more of a chimey, foldy dynamic when compared to the modded Marshall thing. And that leads me into the final chapter of our little amp discussion, which is high gain amps. And high gain amps come, in my opinion, in two distinct flavors. They both come from the same platform, which is it's a Marshall Plexi, which became the Soldano SLO, which in turn became the two big flavors of high gain, which are the rectifier flavor of high gain and the 5150 flavor of high gain. These are notably different to each other in terms of their attack, their tightness, and the way their frequency is centered, if that makes sense. So let's consider the two options that we have here. Our 5150 type gain, we'll go maybe 5 minutes over on this, guys, because I've waffled and I want to get through all this stuff. Our 5150 type gain, if we play both through a vintage 30, we'll take this vintage 30 as an example. The 5150 type amp in this instance is going to be our Victory Kraken, a Victory Super Kraken, which is basically modeled on the blue channel of a 5150. So it's not the red channel, but what you notice on this is it's articulate, it's mid-forward, and it has this very specific like nasal growl to it. It's actually not dissimilar to a Marshall type tone. And if we take that and we hit it with a tube screamer, it becomes every heavy metal riff from the last 20 years ever. Now I'm in standard tuning here, but it's still that same sound. Let's compare and contrast that with the same sound through our dual rectifier archetype, which in this instance is going to be back to the PRS Archon, which is somewhere between a dual rectifier and a Bogner Uberschall in terms of its voice, but it definitely has a good representation of that rectifier type sound. This whole stream is basically me justifying why I have all these amps, by the way, guys, just in case you're wondering. That's justifying it to myself. Through the same speaker, the PRS sounds like this. It's saggy, it's blah, 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 blah. The 5150 type amp, more articulate, more nasal. The rectifier type amp, bigger, buzzier, a lot more going on in the high end, a lot more going on in the lows. The lows are fatter, they take more time to like manifest, if that makes sense, which is why we tend with these kind of amplifiers, especially with this rectifier type amp, we tend to run a boost pedal in front. It's more scooped, says our friend Chris Brown. It absolutely is more scooped, but I actually think it's more of a perceived scoopness because a perceived scoopedness because there's more in the high end and more in the low end. So it feels more scooped. Yeah, we got some talk about how loud it's in the studio. I'm playing through studio monitors, so it is like less than talking level because I got to be able to talk over them. But the amps themselves are running quite hot because they're running into a load box. They're running quite loud. But let's compare the difference very quickly with a boost pedal engaged this time. So this is no boost on the rectifier. And then yes, boost. Not a huge difference in tone. Not a huge difference in tone particularly, but we've got some questions about how large this room is and how loud it is. Very quickly, it's really not very loud. It is less than speaking volume. I'm hearing it on my studio monitors, and it is literally like, you would hear that. If we were sat in this room together, you would hear my voice just slightly louder than the actual guitar sound itself, but the amps are running quite hot. I will say that. The amps are running in the zone. They're not cranked, but they're in the zone. The plexis are cranked, but that's a different story. And the amp itself is maybe like, the room itself is, I think, 3 meters by 2.6 meters. It's not a huge room, not a massive room. I've just got some very wide lenses that make it look very big. Anyway, so going back to this real quick. So the big difference between the boosted sound and the unboosted sound in the rectifier, it's not a huge difference in the tone, but in the detail of the chug. So take a listen to this low string and notice when I kick the boost on, here's boost off, boost on, off, on, off. Same settings, same speaker, same everything. All I'm doing is switching a tube screamer on. If we do the same thing with our 5150 type amp, no boost, with the boost this time. Turn it off, on. The 5150 is already leaner in the low end and already tighter than the dual rectifier, but the boost pedal just tightens it up even further. So, a quick recap with this before we go. Sorry, last thing I'll say on this is the interesting thing about the Marshalls and the high gain sounds here is that this flips that script that we had on the Fender and the speakers, where the Fender is a very bright sounding amp with a very like constrained sounding speaker. We have the opposite going on with our high gain amps. With our high gain amps and with our Marshalls, we tend to use brighter sounding speakers like the Vintage 30, for example, is very popular. Greenbacks can be quite bright. They can be quite sizzly in their own way. They're not necessarily that smooth. They are smooth, but they're not like constrained in the way that our Fender speakers are, for example. If we run these amps into the speaker we use for our Fender demonstration, just sounds like there's a blanket over the speakers. That sounded fantastic with the Fender, but with these high gain amps, to get the detail out of them, we need a brighter speaker, which is interesting because now we have the more mid-rangey sounding amp, which is our higher gain amp, and then that comes paired with some darker sounding speakers. Brighter sounding speakers, rather. Folks! We've already run out of time by a substantial amount. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to continue this discussion on gear over the next few streams together. And what I want you to do is, if you're a member of our community over here on licklibrary.com, go in the community and tell us what you want to hear about when it comes to gear. We'll be doing a gear month in January where it's all going to be gear related. We'll be talking about guitars, we'll be talking about pickups, we'll be talking about all sorts of stuff. We'll do some stuff on dialing amplifiers. But this has been a primer on what you need to know about the main amp food groups. We have run so far over the time that I gotta say goodbye, but I have got a question from our friend Helmet Strap, which is to do with IRs. We will answer that perhaps next week, but we'll see. But I haven't forgotten about you. It's a good question. But folks, I gotta go. I gotta wrap this up because we're way over time. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Nick Jennison. This has been the Monday Guitar Show. Don't forget, it's been brought to you by licklibrary.com and guitarinteractivemagazine.com. Go to licklibrary.com for lessons, guitarinteractivemagazine.com for news, reviews, anything that's not a lesson, you know where to go. While we're here, don't forget to go and check out this month's featured course, which is Guitar Tones Made Simple by John Connon. If you would like some captures of the amps we've used today and you're a Neural DSP user, you can go to my personal Neural DSP Cortex Cloud account. So if we go to Cortex Cloud, let me just quickly find this. Cortex Cloud, where are you? Cortex Cloud, because I'm going to show you this all the same. Cortex Cloud, let's get myself logged in. Log in, do all the things. You will find a little one of me. Here we go. This is my profile. Let me very quickly switch to this tab. Where you will find, there's me, there's Nick Jennison. Look, let's go to this big one. You will find under Neural Captures, I'll make these, the ones that are public are the ones you can have. These are a whole slew of captures of my amplifiers. These are the amps we've used today. You'll find the Archon clean, you'll find the JTM45 clean, you'll find the JCM 800. There's one of the, let me just quickly set this to public. Actually, we've got the Archon, that sounds really cool. We've got loads of these, loads of ones to play with. What's the one I'm looking for? The Victory Copper V2. Let me just quickly set that to public for you guys as well. If you want these, you're a Neural DSP user, go get them. They are for free. I'm not selling them. They are yours. You can have them. In the meantime, I will see you guys next week. Thank you so much for joining me. All the best. You know where we are. Hit the YouTube buttons on the way out the door. I'm going to play over the same backing track on the way out. And I'll see you guys next week.